Good morning and welcome to the RightScale webinar promoting cloud inside your company. Before we get started, we're going to ask you a couple questions, and we use the answers to these questions to help tailor our presentation and also do a little bit of market research. So the first question is coming up now. Where are you in your cloud adoption? So please select one, whether you have no plans currently, if you're researching cloud computing, if you're implementing a pilot project, maybe you are doing development and tests in the cloud, or maybe you're already running production applications in the cloud. Just please take a second and choose where you are at. We see a couple results coming in right now, and it looks like most of you are researching, which is perfect because we have a lot of information to share with you today that should help with that. We've got one more question. Are you in the position of having to promote cloud to your colleagues? This is a simple question, yes or no. And we'll wait for you to select the applicable one. Just as we suspected, yes, most of you are here today and you are in the position of having to promote cloud to your colleagues. That's great. So again, we do have a lot of information to share with you today. It's very exciting. So let's get started. I have here with me Michael Crandell, our CEO and founder. You can follow Michael on Twitter. His username is right there, just his full name, Michael Crandell. I also have here with me Chris Horn, our Director of Products. Chris has recently done a cloud adoption survey with our RightScale users, and we'll be presenting some of the results here. We also have Bryce Larson, RightScale Account Manager. Bryce will be answering your questions throughout the course of the presentation. And if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar panel, you'll see a tab that says Questions. Go ahead anytime throughout the course of the presentation and just enter your questions in there. Bryce will be answering them as the presentation goes on. And we'll also be selecting a few that are more broadly applicable, and Michael or Chris will be answering those live on the webinar. So with that, Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on promoting cloud inside your company. So here's a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk briefly about why we're doing this webinar, although I think the poll showed that most of us are in the position of having to promote cloud once we've made a decision to try to implement it within our company. 3 practical steps you consider, in other words, a way that you can look at the stages and elements of what it means to do that. A whole collection of resources and tools that you can leverage. And then we're going to get a special demo of a brand new part of our website, our total cost of ownership calculator, from Chris Horn, who will walk through exactly how you can use that tool to address the cost side of the equation. We will have a special section at the end for question and answer. Although we'd welcome questions all the way along, we do have people online on the chat window answering those, as Sarah mentioned. So why are we doing this webinar? Well, as I did a survey with our account managers, our sales folks, and said, how often are you in the position of dealing with prospects who are having to go turn around and promote cloud inside their own companies? And they said, most people start out being interested in cloud and in cloud computing, but they have to sell their colleagues on the idea and overcome internal objections. So they estimated, I got estimates ranging from 75 to 100% of the time, that was the situation that prospects considering RightScale and cloud computing were in. So we decided to do this webinar, and it's intended to be an overview. We'll probably rush through some of the subjects a little faster than you might like, but it's intended to be an overview to spark your interest, to let you know what resources are there. And then we have a whole staff of people ready and willing to help, as you'll hear more about later, to help you formulate specific approaches, answers to specific questions, objections, and problems as you promote cloud within your organization. So the first thing I wanted to highlight is actually good news, and that is based on a survey we did just a couple weeks ago of more than 30,000 users at RightScale. We got a selection of responses, and we asked the question, who's driving cloud as an initiative within the company. And what the results showed is that there's a lot of support from the top for exploring cloud and for starting to utilize cloud computing as a resource. So that's good news. You can see that it's senior people, a preponderance of senior people driving cloud as an initiative. The other good news that we received in the survey is that cloud adoption is accelerating. You'll notice across these different areas that fewer people have no plans for cloud, fewer people are only researching or implementing a proof of concept, and an increasing number of companies are launching production apps or continuing to run production apps, and there's been a major increase, almost a 25% year-over-year increase in those who've already specified a budget for investing in rolling out cloud computing. So those are both points of good news. I wanted to share that the way at RightScale, the way that we see where the market is still fairly early days. Many of you might be familiar with this concept of crossing the chasm. It was a famous market research theory that's been out for a while around technologies, and especially new technologies, and how they get adopted over a life cycle. Cloud computing is certainly one of those. And the theory goes that there's a chasm between the early adopters, the innovators and early adopters of a technology, and the early majority. And that green arrow is an indicator of where I think cloud computing is today. In some segments of the market, it's still early adopters. Those are characterized by folks who are interested in buying a change agent, somebody who willing to put up with some glitches in the product just to get a jump on the competition. But increasingly, we're moving into the early majority. Those are customers that are very, very practical. They're looking for improvements in productivity, and they really don't want to tolerate inconvenience. And I think that's really the audience that we all ought to focus on when we're looking at promoting and selling cloud within our organization. It's very practical, it's productivity focused, and it shouldn't inconvenience anyone. So at the end of the day, to put it in kind of a caricature, this is a graphic from a company called explanations.com. We're all dealing at some point in our organizations sometimes with this caricature of the VP of No, the person who's in charge of turning projects down. And really what we want to do is turn that person into the VP of Go. You can see in this caricature that now the safe is open in the back and there's money to be spent, and the VP is now smiling. So that's a little funny way of looking at the fact that we all are dealing with human beings in our organizations, and we need to convince them and show them in a rational way why cloud computing is worthy of adoption. So we pursue something at RightScale that we call consultative selling. It's the opposite of the hard sell. It's really around helping people understand what their needs are and then addressing those needs in a way that that is acceptable. And you know, we've learned from long experience that people buy from companies that they trust. They buy from people who they perceive understand their needs, and they tend to buy solutions as opposed to technologies or features. They buy solutions to problems. So what I'd like to present today is sort of this three-step way of looking at how to promote cloud, starting off with understanding the needs of the particular project or department in your organization that you're trying to design a solution for. Then more of a longer section on how to demonstrate that solution internally, ranging from steps in education to reference customers to creating a demo. And finally, a few thoughts about proposing a starting project. So first of all, with regard to understanding needs, again, we know from talking with hundreds and thousands of prospective cloud customers, and then those who finally do adopt, hundreds and hundreds of production customers, that there are two main drivers that companies are looking for when they pursue cloud. The first one is flexibility and agility. And we've got our little picture of an acrobat doing a flip there to kind of give a visual indication of what we're trying to drive toward in the new IT world. It's a world where you can requisition resources very quickly, where you can scale up or down hardware resources to meet demand, where you can shift from CapEx investment to OpEx investment, meaning from buying machines to paying on an hourly basis or a monthly basis for the use of resources, and where you've overcome the resistance that occurs when you're buying infrastructure outright to transient uses. For example, an R&D department wanting test and dev resources for a 4-week period. It's hard to justify buying new machines just for that one go-round. So that's around the agility and flexibility. The other major driver is cost savings, both cost savings in overall spend, but also in the shift from capital investment, which is, of course, capital intensive or more expensive up front, to operating expenditures, sort of paying for what you use. The other sort of cost, I guess, factor that needs to be figured in is opportunity cost, and that's an intangible cost of what is the benefit that you gain as a company when you can focus on what differentiates your company as opposed to on the basic blocking and tackling of buying servers, racking servers, connecting them to a network router, configuring all that, etc. It's very wonderful what can happen when you enable your company to focus back on what really differentiates you and minimize the time spent on basic heavy lifting tasks related to infrastructure. So those are the two basic drivers, but you need to dig deeper, and so we suggest in terms of a needs analysis, start by asking questions. Make sure you understand what the decision makers in your organization, what are their priorities, what are their concerns, what are the potential objections that they have, and right off the top there are some very common ones. Right or wrong, true or false, there are common objections and concerns that people have. They focus around security, is the cloud reliable, what's the performance, latencies, etc. And then the need to clarify any misunderstandings, clarify what the objections are and dig down deeper so that you can find out whether in fact some of them might stem from a misunderstanding.
And interestingly, often the initial objection that you hear is not necessarily the real one. Probably 80% of the time it's a red herring, and as you ask open-ended questions, dig deeper into it, it uncovers the real concern or area where there's an opportunity for clarification or to increase understanding.
Cool. Thanks, Michael and Chris. This is Sarah. I'd actually like to jump in real quick to ask the audience a question. This is a good opportunity for us to understand what objections or concerns you might be facing in moving to the cloud. So you should see the poll on your screen right now, and please select all that apply. Are you experiencing objectives or concerns around security? Or maybe you need to better understand business benefits or cost differences. Also, would you like to get a better understanding of technical differences versus what the status quo is? Information around selecting applications that are a good fit, or selecting cloud solution providers. We're going to leave this open for a couple more seconds. And again, you can select all that apply. This is multiple choice. And we're seeing, okay, security is the top concern, and there's a pretty even distribution between the remaining concerns. Great, thanks you guys.
Super. So that's a good point about making sure when you dig deeper that if what you hear first might not be the real objection. It may well be what we call a red herring or just something that comes out first. Here's another set of survey results from the same survey we referenced earlier. And these are around challenges faced by companies who have been implementing cloud already. And you can kind of read for yourself. There are a whole array of these. They range from how do we architect and develop applications properly for the cloud. That's really a question that is addressed by best practices. Security concerns you see here is number 2 in this list. But if you combine it with security risks, obviously security is an area of concern. By the way, we do have a webinar that we've done specifically on security that we'll reference later that's been recorded and is in our library. And then the list goes on from here. You'll be able to download this afterward to give some thought and kind of take some time to explore on your own what are the challenges and concerns inside your organization. So let's move on to the second step, which is demonstrating a solution. And the first step there is make sure you educate yourself before you plow in. There are many ways to do this, and we'll go through the details of those in a moment, but take some time to familiarize yourself with the language and terminology around cloud computing, learn a bit about cloud architectures, how servers behave, what the characteristics are that are different in terms of running virtual instances or virtual servers in the cloud, what are the pros and cons, and so on. There's a very useful set of baseline definitions of cloud computing that we find are often useful to help clarify the discussion within companies. They're published by the National Institute of Standards, or NIST, and they break down the categories of infrastructure as a service, or low-level cloud computing, platform as a service, and software as a service. Often, because the word cloud computing is so widely used, there's confusion within an organization among those, and so it's very helpful to be able to refer to that. We have a completely free developer edition of RightScale, so you can actually do quite a bit of work, and we have a number of companies actually running their business on the free developer edition. So you can get a lot done just on that in terms of getting a demo running or getting your own experience, again, to educate yourself. Explore our website. There's a vast amount of information there, and familiarize yourself so you know what the table of contents is there, what resources you can turn to when necessary, and then we'll talk a little bit about identifying reference customers there. So in terms of the website, I've listed some of these elements here. We have a whole collection of webinars. We have a whole collection of white papers. We have a support portal with quite a bit of information that our paying customers use. We run weekly training calls that are introductory kind of jumpstart trainings on how to use RightScale, and they're free for everyone to join. We have a TCO calculator I mentioned that we'll dive into and show a live demo of later. We also offer custom training courses. And Chris, I thought we'd take a minute, instead of just bullets on a slide here, why don't we walk through some of these elements of content that are on the website and show folks.
Certainly. So from the main RightScale website, you'll notice obviously there's a product section which provides quick background information on the solution and capabilities. And then there's a cloud resources section that we're focusing on now, where you can access the TCO calculator, webinars, white papers, etc. And then there's the support section, which is located up in the very top navigation. And we'll quickly click through some of this content that's available. One of those cloud resources was cloud computing links. So when we see an interesting article or blog posting, we'll link to it here. So there's a lot of great content in here to familiarize yourself with cloud adoption challenges and successes and so forth. We obviously also have a list of white papers available, which are both, some are technically oriented, some are business oriented, but there's a lot of great information available here. The webinar library is extensive, to say the least. There are several dozen presentations in here that RightScale has delivered over the last couple of years that deliver great context around understanding how our customers are adopting the cloud and what they're encountering along the way. So highly recommend you look through some of these topics available and review available webinars. We also have a very active forum available. There are more than 4,000 members of the forum. So there's, again, a wealth of information in here in terms of practical deployment experiences from customers that are very hands-on with deployments. And then moving on to the support portal, you'll see here there's a section on tutorials. We have a common, frequently asked questions. We have a section that covers background information on the different cloud infrastructure providers available, and all of our documentation is available online to review as needed to answer questions. Clicking through the cloud section, for example, just to show you that, you'll notice there's just a wealth of both high-level introductory information as well as technical drill-down information to address questions, and it's all searchable, so it's typically very easy to find answers to questions within either the forums or the support portal. And then finally, under the tutorial section, there are dozens of walkthrough examples of deploying applications to the cloud, from simple scenarios to advanced multi-tier architectures that include screenshots, context, and full configuration information and examples along the way. So you could pull up one of these tutorials, for example, and even just reading through it, understand the level of effort, the concepts behind it, the steps involved, what the choices would be along the way, and get a very good understanding of what it looks like to deploy applications onto cloud infrastructure.
Great, thank you, Chris. While we're going back to the slides, I wanted to interject a question. A question has come in over the line. A gentleman says, I'm based in Europe, and the biggest concerns about cloud computing for my colleagues is data protection. What about this? So from a point of view of, I think this is really getting to the sort of security question that when you're using an external resource, if you are using an external resource, there are persistent questions about security. Of course, one easy answer is that now with the rise of so-called private clouds, these are solutions like cloud.com, eucalyptus.com, and others, which are supported by RightScale. You can run the cloud internally and manage it with RightScale. And so if you absolutely need to have the workload or the data residing inside your four walls, there is a solution now that still offers a lot of the flexibility of cloud, but maintains the location of the servers and the data inside your data center. For external clouds and so-called public clouds, security, I really like to break that down into three categories. There are questions around security, there are questions around regulatory compliance or company policy compliance, and then there's trust. On the security front, there's been quite a bit of work done. It is an evolving picture, but security is really quite high in the cloud right now. And to take Amazon as an example, as mentioned, we did a joint webinar with them, and it's on our website. There have also been numerous talks. They have white papers on security. I think the claim is fair to say that security in Amazon's clouds is as good as, if not better, than in most enterprise data centers. Most of the security breaches we read about are not cloud breaches. They're things like an employee left a laptop in a taxi, or somebody walked out with data on a thumb drive, this kind of thing. So actually cloud has a pretty strong record in relation to security. Compliance is a different question. Again, you may be operating under regulations where you have to have that data on site by law or by policy, in which case a private cloud might be a good solution. And finally, there's trust. And I would only say that every day trust grows in cloud as a solution. We've seen this perhaps the longest in the software as a service part of cloud computing with companies like Salesforce.com. 10 years ago, a lot of questions about how could you trust putting your company's crown jewels sales data on somebody else's network. And in fact, Salesforce.com has done so well with explosive growth and the largest companies as customers in the world. They've pretty much answered the question of trust, at least in their application area. So I think that'll be an evolving picture, and as more and more customers come on, there's more and more reassurance. And in fact, the reassurance around existing customers is a very important part of promoting cloud. We've put just a collection of logos here, a small subset of companies using RightScale to manage their clouds, but you can see that there are a lot of very familiar names there. These range from Web 2.0 style companies and Facebook social gaming companies to biopharmas and sort of standard traditional bricks and mortar American companies like Mattel, on to educational institutions like Harvard University, and media like Associated Press and ESPN. So there's a wide range of companies using cloud, from small, medium business up through enterprise and across a number of application areas. The important point is that the collection of companies that we can help you speak to as reference customers is very, very strong, and it tends to create a lot of sense of confidence when colleagues see who's already using the cloud and can check with them. So the next step around demonstrating a solution is create an actual demo. Again, reaching back to the fact that we have a free edition, pick a specific problem or opportunity in your company and build a demo around it. It doesn't need to be absolutely complete. It can be kind of a proof of concept, but that is a very convincing technique. I'll give you an example. One of our VPs was speaking to a group of IBM representatives overseas in Europe, actually in Italy, and he showed a live demo of a pre-configured deployment. A deployment in our language means a cluster of servers. In this case, it was the IBM middleware stack built around DB2 database and WebSphere application server. And he had a pre-configured deployment. He made a modification, some change to one of the configuration parameters, and launched it. And 5 to 10 minutes later, it was all running. And his intention was to demonstrate that you could have control over changing anything that you wanted to about the way your solution runs, while maintaining the agility and rapid provisioning that we all seek in cloud solutions. But it was very impressive to that group because it was an actual live demo, and when they saw what could be provisioned in just a few minutes that they were used to taking weeks to get provisioned, it had a very strong impact, and it followed the basic rule of show rather than tell. So please contact us if you'd like some help in brainstorming what a demo might involve or how you might go about building one. We've done it many, many times, and we'd be pleased to assist you. Finally, think about proposing an actual practical project that you could launch in the cloud that would be a starting point. And here we like to remind folks that cloud is not an all or nothing either or discussion. Often people get hung up in whether cloud solves everything or solves nothing. Neither is really the case. Any given project in a company or application may or may not be suited for the cloud. As one of our sales guys has told me, in any larger company, you'll hear more than 10 reasons to use the cloud, and you'll equally hear more than 10 not to. So the question is, which workloads are appropriate? And that's where we recommend go for low-hanging fruit, go for a specific project. As I put here, don't try to boil the entire ocean, but pick a small, well-defined project to kick off a proof of concept. Once that first application is operational, you can grow and expand from there. We have a special program called VIP accounts. These are the full paid RightScale editions that we enable for select prospects on a no-cost basis, exactly to enable these kinds of proof of concepts, so that you don't need to make a commitment in advance in order to get to the point where you can convince your colleagues that moving on with cloud is a good idea. And finally, don't forget that we have a number of cloud-ready, ready-to-go solution packs around very common use cases that you can leverage to get these demos up and running quickly, these initial projects. So there are a collection of solution packs around dev and test. They include support for 4 different programming languages, including PHP, Java, Ruby on Rails, and .NET for Windows apps. We have another solution pack for scalable websites across a number of languages, app servers, web servers, etc. We have a third around a grid framework that allows you to do batch processing very, very efficiently in the cloud, and that efficiently both from a time to completion point of view and efficiently from a cost point of view. We also have a special edition focused on social gaming. So watch for more of these coming from us in the future. but these are ready to go sort of quick start solutions that you can use to get a project started in your company. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris now, and he's going to shift screens and actually dive into this brand new TCO calculator that we've just built, which I'd venture to say among all the TCO calculators that we've looked at, this is really the most thorough. It's the best TCO calculator out there in terms of taking into account all the factors you need to look at in total cost of ownership in moving to the cloud.
Thank you, Michael. So I've been working on the TCO calculator for the last several weeks. I welcome any feedback that you have to improvement, questions, and comments as we go. And afterwards, we'll have an exit poll, a couple of questions related to what your experience has been, and if you have any comments or feedback additionally, would love to see it there. You can get to the TCO calculator from the main RightScale homepage. You'll notice on the left column there's a Cloud Computing Calculator section with Try Calculator link. And when you navigate to that, it brings up the computation inputs page. There are effectively 4 sections to this page. To compute estimates for your environment, we basically look at the type of deployment or the use case that you're deploying, the size of the deployment, and then you have the opportunity to override defaults in terms of the resources being consumed for servers, file and mountable storage, bandwidth, inbound, outbound, etc. And then finally, you can choose the load volatility that you would likely experience in production. And we'll step through each of those in a little more detail to clarify what they do. As additional background, what the calculator is generating as results is a TCO analysis over a 5-year term showing upfront versus annual recurring costs, and that's with a 3-year hardware refresh assumed in there. So behind each of these areas is a help link. So for example, if we dig down on the type of deployment, you get a description of what this means and then how it's utilized by the calculator. So within the types of deployment, what we've created are basically baseline implementations, which would be the size 1 instance, kind of the minimum resource size for a production quality instance. And you can scale out these baseline resources using the size of the deployment scaler, and then you can also simulate scaling up the server sizes within the deployments by increasing the number of compute units relative to the number of servers within the defaulted values. And as background for those of you who may not yet be familiar with compute units, they are a metric that we use to size server instances based on their computing and memory capacity, network capacity, additional characteristics that then provide a consistent relative measure of computing capacity that's independent of the actual underlying hardware within a specific cloud infrastructure provider or private cloud environment. So if we step back and look at 2 of these deployment scenarios, for example, grid computing, for example, is defaulted to 30 large worker servers processing work from queues in a computationally intensive task such as pharmaceutical research. Whereas the web application scenario, for example, the baseline installation would be 6 large servers with 2 front ends, 2 application servers, and then a master and slave database for the application. When we look at size of deployment, this is effectively a linear scalar for the default resources for the type of deployment that we're talking about. So by default, the values assume that you're working with large server instances and you're scaling out you're increasing the number of server instances as you increase the size of the deployment. But if, on the other hand, you wanted to say, instead of having 6 large servers, I want to simulate scaling up and I want to have 6 extra large servers, then what you'll do within the calculator is to reduce the number of servers relative to the compute units to get to that level. So in this case, a deployment with extra large servers versus large would use twice as many compute units per server. And at the bottom of this help section is a mapping that shows that, for example, a medium-sized server consumes 1 RCU, a large server is 2 RCUs, and to speak to the general size of a large server, it would be a virtualized dual-core 2.6 gigahertz processor with about 8 gig of RAM. So as you scale up the size of deployment, again, you'll notice that the resources consumed are just linearly increasing within the calculator. And then finally, selecting load volatility. So here we have 4 common scenarios based on what we've seen in the wild. Constant load, for example, means that you're running with stable demand for the service. It defaults to a 30% base utilization that infrequently peaks, perhaps twice per year, up to a 60% utilization. Whereas unpredictable burst is a pattern of infrequent, unplanned periods of peak demand. So you're having to size servers larger to account for that peak demand, and you're normally running at a 15% base utilization that might peak to 75% utilization 30 times throughout the year. And you can obviously select your applicable scenario, click on Calculate My Results, and that brings you to the results page where we have the results of the calculated values as well as some of the agility benefits articulated. So in this simple scenario with 6 large servers, you can avoid $33,000 in upfront costs, which is primarily capital expenditures, and save $40,000 per year on operating and ongoing expenses over a 5-year term when deploying RightScale to the cloud versus an on-site data center deployment. And the page kind of breaks down some of the areas where benefits are driven. So under utility pricing, for example, you're only paying for what you use. So when you have to size the servers to meet peak demand in-house, you obviously have underutilized servers as a result, and you're spending more for hardware out of pocket than you need to. Whereas in the cloud, you're able to pay on demand, and the model of the calculator is basically running the cost for your base computing needs and then scaling that up to bring in additional servers or larger size servers as the demand warrants. In terms of shared flexible capacity, server utilization, you're obviously going to be able to run fewer servers at higher capacity because you can bring on additional servers as needed on demand. In terms of server capacity, knowledge that your system can automatically scale to meet any demand, priceless. That is a calculated value. It's hard to come up with the formula.
I like that, Chris, but let me just jump in for a second, because I think what that highlights, and you remark on it a little bit lower down also around agility, is that there are intangible benefits to using cloud that are very, very real and important also. So as you go to use this tool to promote internally, while we had a little fun humorously with that answer, the reality is that's critically important to most businesses to be able to scale to meet demand, because if your site is slow or unresponsive, you lose business, you lose the trust of your customers, etc. And the same thing around the agility of your staff lower down, the notion that you can actually keep people, I guess, powered with the IT infrastructure that they need is critically important. So please go ahead, but I wanted to make sure that was highlighted.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of facility, hardware, and power costs, it's very predictable what those expenses are going to be in the cloud, and there's significant reductions over on-site costs for those. In this case, going from 72 cents per compute hour down to 21 cents in the cloud. In terms of downtime, the cloud is running on highly fault-tolerant hardware. And so just based on uptime percentages for massive data center cloud infrastructure versus what you typically experience in a private data center, there are uptime savings. And then in terms of agility, you're able to launch new production deployments in less time using server template and deployment architecture, basically codified best practices that let you instantiate new servers on demand and bring them online in 5 minutes, as opposed to going through the hardware provisioning cycle that can take weeks. And again, going to intangibles, in many cases for a project, time to market of a couple of weeks can have a significant impact from a market perspective on the success of the project.
Chris, let me just interject. We'd like to keep this live with questions that are coming in. And one question that came in said, does this calculator include the cost of Amazon? And was Amazon Web Services used as the infrastructure as a service assumed here?
Yes, and to both. Amazon is the anchor for most of the cost estimates behind the calculator. And they also, their pricing is factored into the numbers in terms of running the cloud, via RightScale, deploying onto Amazon. But we did generalize the numbers away from Amazon specifically. So, there are many points where, whether you're deploying to, Rackspace or another provider, the calculator seeks to be agnostic.
Uh-huh. And I don't know at what point you're going to go into this, but what if somebody wants to dig down underneath? What typically happens is this calculator was designed for simplicity so that while there's a lot of detail here, someone could punch in a few numbers and get some pretty clear result. What if somebody wants to dig deeper?
Well, let me quickly step into the background spreadsheet, which basically shows the architecture of the calculator, the assumptions that go into it. This spreadsheet is broken out into a main tab, which basically aggregates all of the inputs to the calculator, and then it provides an override opportunity for all of the assumptions. So if you're interested in walking through some of these estimate scenarios for your environment, you can contact your account manager or contact the number listed on the TCO Calculator website, and we'd be happy to basically put this in your application deployment context. But the spreadsheet version of the calculator has a lot more knobs and opportunities to tune variables. So you can similarly specify at the top the type of application you're deploying and scale the size, and you'll notice as it's scaling up and down all of the default resources, just like we saw on the web version. But you also have the opportunity to come in here and say, well, specifically, I'd like to be able to say I've got a deployment with 2 medium-sized front ends, and then I anticipate it's going to have 6 large app servers in the middle, and then I'm going to have 2 extra large database servers behind the application, and pull up a scenario that very specifically models that in terms of the computing resources and the number of servers operating, and then how long they're operating. So again, you can similarly select the load volatility scenario, and then from here you can see how these values are defaulting. So for example, in this case of unpredictable burst, we're running at a 15% base utilization, and then 15% of the year it spikes up to 75%. So you could, you'd have the opportunity to modify any of these values and to say, well, we would run it at a higher utilization, and we might peak, only 10% of the year, and that happens about 20 times. Similarly, all of the data center and cloud cost assumptions are available here to view and then modify to suit your environment. So if you happen to be in downtown New York, where the cost of power is higher, you can raise your cost per kilowatt hour from 9 cents to 15 cents. And similarly, if your average cost per administrator is $110,000 a year, you can specify that. And all of these dynamically update the spreadsheet. So really what this serves to do is, when you factor in data center, power, racks, maintenance, administrative labor, cost for troubleshooting hardware, it seeks to basically just objectively identify all of these cost drivers that otherwise can be assumed to be taken care of by somebody else, but they are a real cost to your organization, operationally. And the spreadsheet, basically has a 5-year view, as I said before. So here you can see, for example, cost in the data center. There's a section for the upfront costs, for data center and racking and so forth. There's the initial cost of hardware for the server, network, and storage, and then a replacement cycle, on a 3-year iteration. And then there's annual recurring costs for maintenance, power, administration, and so forth. And contrasting that to the 5-year view of the cloud, in this case where you have reserved servers that support your base typical utilization, those are going to take advantage of 3-year reserved instance pricing. So those, you have an initial upfront cost to basically buy down your cloud computing per hourly cost, and then a recurring cost at the 3-year point. And but most of the other costs in terms of all the hardware costs, maintenance costs for the hardware, those simply go away, and they're supplemented by cost for the cloud services, infrastructure services themselves, and then the software as a service for management. So at this point, I'd like to quickly go through a couple of usage scenarios where we've plugged in some of our example customer data. Obviously, we have visibility into how customers are deploying their applications to the cloud in terms of the size of the servers, quantity of the servers, how they scale them up and down, the amount of data they're consuming, and the bandwidth and throughput. So we can effectively model through this what their comparable cost would have been if they had gone with an on-site data center implementation. So in this case, it's a web application customer, and to meet maximum peak demand, they would be procuring basically 42 large servers, 44 extra large servers, and then a dozen 2XL servers. And then they have about 1.5 terabytes of mountable storage, a small amount of file storage, and a couple of terabytes of inbound and outbound bandwidth. And they would effectively, they've avoided $949,000 in upfront costs, and they're saving $362,000 per year deploying to the cloud, while taking advantage of all the other intangible benefits along the way.
So that's based on a actual real customer that we are keeping anonymous.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
Another example here is around media transcoding. So taking digital content, transforming it to transcoding to alternate formats, and then delivering that out to where it's consumed. And in this case, a peak demand scenario involves 88 small servers, 16 mediums, 96 larges, and 6 XLs to support the environment. And there's obviously a high storage requirements around media. There's 17 terabytes in file storage, 14 terabytes in mountable storage, and a high bandwidth inbound and outbound. And this customer is avoiding over $800,000 in upfront costs and saving over $500,000 a year deploying through cloud architecture.
Right, right. That's significant. Have you gotten one more example for us?
Yeah, there's one more here. This is a social gaming customer. The obvious conclusion might be that it's Zynga, but it's actually not. Their implementations are larger. And this, so web application in a social gaming environment, they're running 130 large servers, 134 extra large, a dozen 2XLs, and 2 quad XLs in the environment, with about 4 terabytes of mountable storage. And they're avoiding $2.5 million in upfront costs and saving $700,000 per year under the model.
Right, right. I'd just like to point out here, if you look at the graph, it shows quite a substantial cost difference. And part of what we worked at here in this spreadsheet is all of the assumptions are exposed, and you can see there's quite a bit of granularity. And at the end of the day, we're quite aware that your company's setup may differ from the assumptions made here. We did spend a lot of time trying to understand what the right common assumptions should be, but we understand that situations differ. So you might argue that the way you have your internal IT set up, the admin costs called out at the top there are much lower because you're more efficient. That's fine. In fact, even if you took those off, you would still see a huge cost differential, even if you managed to run the entire thing without any admin, which is kind of a magical assumption, but still there's so much benefit to be gained here around everything from the OpEx to the automation. And the reason that we released this in dual format as a simple online calculator, but having this spreadsheet as a backup that account managers can help consult with you about is exactly so that it can be tailored to the specifics of your situation. So whatever your situation, if you're a mature company with a lot of info about your data center efficiencies, you can plug that in. Or if you're just a startup and you're looking for some common reasonable assumptions, we have those also.
Yeah, so for more information or for a walkthrough of the spreadsheet to understand, what it looks like in your environment, again, you can contact your sales manager or you can reach us at the phone number available on the TCO Calculator page.
Great. So that concludes the main part of the presentation. So we'll now open up for some questions, and I have a few here. Let's launch in. The first one is, I have two questions that are more or less about the same sort of specific application. Do you currently have any active clients that are using your cloud offerings for their domain server and file server? And it may be the same or related questions. Can I use your cloud offerings for my company's domain controller and Active Directory for our logins as well as for my file server? The answer is yes. In fact, we have a partner that's built an Active Directory solution for Windows and .NET, and so we can help you there. The answer is yes. A related question, a couple of questions about Windows support. My company's website is based on .NET. How do RightScale Windows templates compare with Linux templates? And a related question, do your Windows templates have the same functionality as the Linux templates? Basically, the core support for Windows is equivalent to the support for Linux. That means in terms of scripting whatever you want on top of the OS, that is there, that's available. We support Windows Server 2003 and 2008. It is the fact that because we have been working with Linux longer, there are more cloud-ready templates already in existence. But the core support is equivalent, and we do have a number of Windows templates that are available around solutions like SharePoint. I mentioned the .NET development environment and others. So in the end, let us know what specifically you're interested in, and we can tell you where we are on that, whether we have an existing template or one is coming. Let's see, in terms of other questions, customers are concerned that if the internal connection is down, business is down, and employees are not able to function. Are files available online? Well, one of the characteristics of RightScale is that the system is separate from the underlying cloud, and that while we launch and manage and terminate servers, RightScale is not actively required while the servers are running. They run independently. So there's a distributed, loosely coupled architecture in that sense. And then the other question about connectivity, I think increasingly as we move forward, that is very much a question with any cloud solution that's using an external public cloud, and it applies all the way from software as a service like Salesforce to RightScale and low-level clouds. So the ultimate solution would be that if you're looking for true internal independence, you might want to consider a private cloud. As I mentioned, there's a package available on cloud.com or on Eucalyptus. With RightScale, there's a starter proof of concept early access program that you can start using today, and those would give you independence from public cloud. But it's very much of a trade-off. And these days, as it's pretty easy to get connectivity redundantly and so on, you can operate with more confidence that external clouds will not present a problem.
So, Michael, here's another question. What about backup and restore capability to support business continuity? That can be as big a concern for some as security.
Great question. I think the resources in cloud computing for business continuity are about as good as you can get. And to your statistics earlier, Chris, about server uptime, one of the reasons that there can be higher application uptime is not that the servers in the cloud are somehow better than the servers you run inside your data center. It's that there are a lot more of them to choose from and across a wider range of facilities. So again, to take Amazon as an example, you can not only request different resources within a data center or a so-called availability zone, you can request them from different availability zones, which means physically separate data centers in a region, and you can also request them from different regions. It's also the case that many of the low-level resources like S3, the simple storage service, already have redundancy built in. S3 guarantees 3 copies of your data across at least different availability zones and different regions, so that even the loss of an entire data center or an entire region of data centers would not completely destroy your data. So with capabilities like that, which are massively expensive to build yourself, you can actually, for very low entry cost, get that kind of capability from the cloud. So business continuity and disaster recovery are very strong. Let's see, I think we're coming to the end of the hour. We will continue to keep the Q&A line up if you continue to have questions. But at this time, I think in order to be respectful of people's time, why don't we wrap up, Sarah?
Cool. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Chris, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. This webinar, like all of our other webinars, has been recorded, and it will go live online within the next 24 hours. You can find it on our homepage, RightScale.com. Visit Cloud Resources and then click on Webinars, and there you'll find our complete webinar library. That's a whole host of information about cloud topics ranging from topics like today and also webinars that we've done with our partners. As Michael mentioned, Bryce will be staying online, so if you have any other questions, please feel free to continue submitting those via the question panel. But otherwise, that ends our live portion for today. Thank you so much.